They say the little things are the first to go. I used to think that was a cliché, something you read in a magazine article about spicing up your marriage. But it's not. It's a slow fade, a gradual turning away that you don't even notice until you're suddenly standing in a silent room looking at a stranger you've known for 2 decades. For me, it started with the coffee. Sarah and I had a routine that had been a silent, comfortable ritual for nearly 20 years. I'd get up first, a little before 6, and I'd put on a pot of coffee for both of us. The smell would wake her up, and she'd come out, and we'd sit together in the quiet morning, just listening to the world wake up outside our window. It was our time. But a little over a year ago, she started getting up later. Then she'd tell me she didn't want any coffee. And then, without ever really talking about it, the ritual was just gone. That was the first domino to fall. After that, the other small things started to vanish. The shared jokes that didn't land anymore. The casual touch of a hand on a shoulder in passing. The way we used to finish each other's sentences. She started taking phone calls in the other room, whispering. She stayed up later, sometimes until 2 in the morning, catching up on work emails. She changed the password on her phone. At first, I didn't think anything of it. I told myself it was stress. Our youngest, Liam, had just started high school, and that's a whole new kind of chaos. Sarah had a new project at her firm, and it was demanding. I rationalized it all, because that's what we do, isn't it? We find a narrative that makes sense, a story that protects us from the terrible, unspeakable truth. You don't want to believe that the woman you built a life with, the mother of your 2 kids, the person who knows you better than anyone on this planet, would ever betray you. So you tell yourself a different story, one where she's just tired, or stressed, or going through a phase. I tried to talk to her about it. I'd try to bring it up in the car or over a rushed dinner. I'd say something like, "Hey, you seem a million miles away lately. Is everything okay?" And she'd always give me the same answer, a quick, almost too rehearsed response. "I'm fine, Mark, just a lot on my plate." It was a wall, smooth and solid, that I couldn't get past. It was like I was a salesman at the door and she was always on her way somewhere else. My gut told me something was wrong, but my mind kept overruling it. My mind said, "Mark, you're 47 years old. You're in a long-term marriage. This is what it looks like. This is the quiet part." We all have that voice in our head, the one that tells us to be reasonable, to not overreact, to stay calm. And in a long marriage, that voice is particularly loud. It tells you to be a man, to not be needy, to not be paranoid. So I listened to it. The signs, in retrospect, were as big as billboards. She started going to the gym at odd hours, claiming she needed to de-stress, but she'd always come back smelling like someone else's perfume. She started dressing differently, buying new clothes, things she never would have worn before. She was on her phone all the time, and when I walked into a room, she would snap it shut or turn the screen away from me. I remember one evening, I was in the garage fixing a small leak on our sprinkler system. I was dirty, my hands were grimy from the soil, and I was exhausted. I came in through the side door and saw her on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, a small, knowing smile on her face. A genuine, happy smile. It was a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months. I just stood there for a second, my wrench still in my hand, and I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. She looked up, saw me, and the smile vanished. She became the Sarah I had gotten used to. Distant, preoccupied. That smile wasn't for me. The silence between us became a third person in the room. It was thick and heavy, and it pushed us apart. We'd sit in the living room, supposedly watching a show, but we were both on our phones, in two separate worlds. The kids would come in, and they'd fill the space, and for a little while we'd be a family again, but as soon as they went to bed, the silence would return, louder than before. I started staying up later too, but I wasn't on my phone. I'd sit at my desk, looking at old photos of us, photos from our wedding, from the birth of our kids, from a trip we took to Italy a few years back. In all those photos, we were looking at each other. There was so much light in our eyes, so much joy. I didn't recognize the two people in those photos anymore. I just felt an enormous sense of loss. It's an odd feeling, grief for a person who is still sitting in the next room. I started to feel paranoid. I was checking her phone bills, looking for strange numbers, tracking her mileage on the car. I was becoming a different person, someone I didn't recognize. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't stop. The more I looked, the more the little things started to make sense. A new restaurant she claimed she went to for a business lunch, but the charge was from a place that only served dinner. A weekend trip she took with her sister, but a text from her sister later revealed that Sarah had only met up with her for part of the day. The lies were small at first, but they were adding up. It was like a puzzle with missing pieces, and I was starting to realize that the pieces weren't missing, they had been deliberately hidden. My stomach was in a constant state of turmoil, and I was having trouble sleeping. I wasn't a detective, I was just a man trying to make sense of a world that no longer made sense. I was looking for a logical explanation, but all I was finding were contradictions. The last piece of the puzzle fell into place one afternoon. It was a Saturday, and the kids were out with friends. Sarah was out too, supposedly running errands. I was doing yard work, pulling weeds and trimming the hedges. I came inside to grab a bottle of water from the kitchen, and I saw her purse sitting on the counter. It was a stupid, impulsive thing to do, but I opened it. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just a feeling, a confirmation. And there it was, a small, worn piece of paper folded in a wallet inside a side pocket. It was a parking ticket, not for our town or for the city where she worked. It was for a small, out-of-the-way park, a place where people go to walk their dogs or just sit in their cars and watch the world go by. It was the place where they had been meeting. The date on the ticket was from a Tuesday, a day she had claimed she was working late at the office. The ticket was old from months ago, but it felt new. It was the first solid piece of evidence I had. It was a parking ticket, but it was also a signed and dated confession. I stood in the kitchen, holding that piece of paper, and the air went out of the room. The quiet that had been a constant companion in our home suddenly felt deafening. The lie was exposed, not by a text message or a phone call, but by a little slip of paper. It felt pathetic, but it was all I needed. The truth had finally arrived, not with a bang, but with a quiet, devastating whimper. I put the ticket back in her purse and went back outside to the yard. I kept pulling weeds, but my mind was a million miles away. I wasn't thinking about her or him. I was thinking about the life I thought I had and the man I thought I was. I was thinking about all the lies and all the silent moments and all the times I had convinced myself it was all in my head. And I was thinking about what came next.
When you find out, the world doesn't stop turning. The micro hook that leads you into the silence isn't just about the absence of noise. It's about the presence of a vast, overwhelming void where your life used to be. I went back inside after a couple of hours, and she was home. She was in the kitchen, humming to herself, unpacking groceries. She looked so normal, so mundane. That was the most jarring part of all of this, the mundane nature of the betrayal. It wasn't a dramatic scene from a movie. It was groceries on a counter and an old, faded parking ticket in a purse. I looked at her, and for the first time, I wasn't angry. I was just empty. The love I had felt for her, the foundation of our entire life, had been so eroded by this silence and these little lies that all that was left was a hollow space. That evening, we had dinner with the kids, and it was a perfectly normal evening. We talked about their school, their friends, their sports. We laughed at a silly joke our son made. But all I could hear was the silence. It was like a constant hum under every word. I looked at her and saw the way she smiled at our daughter, the way she cut up our son's chicken, and I wondered if she felt it too. Did she feel the chasm between us, or was she just a very good actress? The next day was Sunday, and we did what we always did. We went to church, we had brunch, we went for a long walk. It was all so normal, but it was a lie. We were living a lie. The whole world was a stage, and we were just two actors playing a scene we had perfected over 2 decades. And the audience, our kids, had no idea. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I knew I needed to, but I also knew that if I did it right then, in that moment of raw emotion, it would be a disaster. It would be all yelling and accusations and tears, and I wasn't ready for that. I was tired. So I did what I always did when faced with a difficult problem. I started to think. I started to analyze. I started to collect data. I didn't want to be the frantic, emotional man who had just found a parking ticket in his wife's purse. I wanted to be the methodical, logical man who had built a life and who knew how to deconstruct one. It wasn't about being cold. It was about protecting myself, and more importantly, our kids. I knew that once the dam broke, the flood would be immense, and I wanted to be standing on high ground when it hit. So I started a digital journal. I opened a new document on my work laptop, a place where she would never think to look, and I wrote it all down. Every single lie, every late night, every suspicious text message. I documented the password changes on her phone, the odd credit card charges, the strange mileage on the car. I wrote down the date of the parking ticket and the name of the park. I wasn't a detective. I was just a man gathering evidence for the case of his life. I was building a case against the life I had known. It sounds cold, I know, but it was the only way I could cope. I needed to turn the emotional turmoil into a logical problem. I needed to take the pain and turn it into a checklist. I needed to feel like I had some control over the situation, even if the only control I had was over the words on a page. I also knew I couldn't do this alone. I was too in deep. I needed a professional. I needed a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but a family law specialist. I found one through a colleague at work, a woman who had gone through a difficult divorce a few years back. She gave me the name of a lawyer named David. She said he was a bulldog in the courtroom, but he was also a compassionate man who understood the emotional toll of a divorce. I made an appointment for the following week, a Thursday. I told Sarah I had a long business lunch. She didn't even ask who I was meeting. She just said, "Okay, have a good time." It was so easy to lie to her. And that's when I realized that she had been lying to me for so long that it had become second nature to her. The ease with which she accepted my lie was a testament to the fact that our relationship was already dead. It had been dead for a while. The meeting with David was eye-opening. I sat in his office, a worn briefcase on my lap, and I just talked. I told him everything from the small, little lies to the parking ticket in her purse. I showed him the notes I had been taking, the documents I had been collecting. He didn't interrupt me. He just listened. When I was done, he just sat there for a minute looking at me. Then he said, "Mark, you've done half my work for me. You have a very strong case here." He told me that in these situations, the person who acts first is usually the one who has the advantage. The person who is blindsided is the one who is left to pick up the pieces. He told me that my instincts were right. Don't confront her, not yet. You need to be prepared. You need to have a plan. You need to know what you're going to do next because she's not going to make this easy for you. David outlined a strategy for me, a step-by-step plan that felt more like a chess game than a marriage ending. First, get a clear picture of our finances. Every bank account, every investment, every asset.
He told me to go through our home office and to make copies of everything: tax returns, retirement accounts, mortgage documents. He told me that in a divorce, the financial documents are the roadmap. They tell you where all the money is and where it went. He also told me to change the locks on my home office and to set up a new bank account in my name only. He said, "You don't want to be in a position where she can drain all the accounts. That's a common first step for people who are scared and angry." His words were cold and clinical, but they were also a lifeline. They were a path out of the emotional chaos I was in. They gave me a roadmap to a new life, a new way forward.
They say that revenge is a dish best served cold. But the truth is, the coldness isn't about making someone else suffer. It's about insulating yourself from the pain of a truth you can no longer ignore. Over the next few weeks, I became a man on a mission. The emotional turmoil was still there, a constant low-level thrum in my stomach, but it was now overshadowed by a quiet, focused determination. My life was no lie, but the narrative I had been living was. So I decided I was going to rewrite it, one document at a time. The first step was the financials. I told Sarah I needed to organize our tax documents for the accountant, a believable enough lie. She just nodded and went back to her phone. She didn't care. She didn't see me. I was a ghost in my own home. I spent my evenings in the home office, methodically going through every folder, every receipt, every statement. I scanned everything onto a secure hard drive and sent copies to David. I found out that she had been taking money out of our joint savings account. Small amounts at first, but it was adding up. A few hundred here, 1,000 there. She'd put them in a separate account I didn't know about. I didn't know what for, but I had a pretty good idea. It was for him. I found receipts for expensive dinners, trips to a weekend resort, even a few plane tickets to another city. The receipts were a roadmap of their life together, a life that was so different from the one she was living with me. A life that was filled with adventure and excitement, with expensive meals and spontaneous trips. My heart felt like it was breaking all over again. The worst part of all of this was the discovery of who the other man was. It wasn't a stranger from her office or a random person she met at a bar. It was a man I knew, a man I had considered a close friend. Let's call him Kevin. Kevin and I had met through our kids, who were on the same sports teams. He and his wife, Laura, had become our friends. We'd have them over for dinner, go to their house for barbecues, and even took a few family vacations with them. Kevin was a quiet man, a little nerdy, with a passion for cars and old rock and roll. I had always thought he was a good guy, a little shy, but a decent human being. I had always trusted him. And now, I was looking at his name on a credit card statement, a name I had seen on dozens of receipts. He and Sarah were at a hotel in the city together, the same day she told me she was working late. The betrayal of Kevin hit me harder than the betrayal of Sarah. Sarah was my wife, my partner, the person I had a history with. Kevin was my friend. He was the person I had trusted to watch my kids when we were out of town. He was the person I had confided in about my relationship problems, the person I had talked to about my fears and insecurities. He had listened to me, and he had nodded, and he had looked at me with what I had assumed was empathy and understanding. But now I knew that his empathy was a lie, and his understanding was a pretense. He was using my trust, my pain, my vulnerability to get closer to my wife. The betrayal was so complete, so total, that I felt sick to my stomach. I felt like I was in a nightmare, a silent, surreal dream where everyone was wearing a mask. I didn't talk to Kevin. I didn't want to. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing that I knew. I didn't want to hear his excuses, his lies, his pitiful apologies. I didn't want to give him a chance to manipulate me. I just wanted to disappear from his life, to erase him from my memory. But I couldn't. He was a constant presence in my life, a constant reminder of the lies. He was everywhere. He was on my social media,
in the group chat for the kids' soccer team, in the faces of his own kids. I had to tell the kids that we were taking a break from the soccer team because of a scheduling conflict. They were confused and hurt, but they accepted it. I had to create another lie to protect them from the truth. I met with David again and told him about Kevin. He was angry on my behalf. This is not just a betrayal, Mark. This is an assault on your dignity. He used your trust to get to her. He's not a friend, he's a predator, and we will use this to our advantage. David explained that in a divorce, it's not just about the money. It's about the narrative. It's about who gets to tell the story. And he told me that in this story, I was the victim, not the fool. He told me that I had been betrayed by two people I had trusted, and that I was the one who had the moral high ground. He told me that in the courtroom, the judge would see it that way too. I started to feel a strange sense of calm. The anger and the pain were still there, but they were no longer overwhelming. They were a low, controlled fire that I could use to my advantage. I wasn't going to yell, I wasn't going to scream, and I wasn't going to cry. I was going to be a man. A calm, collected, and dignified man who was going to walk away with his head held high. I was going to be a man who was going to show them that I was not a victim, but a survivor. I was going to be a man who was going to prove to them that they had not broken me, they had just given me a reason to get stronger. It wasn't a plan for revenge, it was a plan for freedom.
The day of the confrontation arrived, and it didn't feel like a day of reckoning. It felt like an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day when the sky is gray and the air is heavy with the promise of rain. I had a meeting with David in the morning where we went over the final details of the divorce settlement. He told me I was in a strong position. He told me that with the evidence I had, there was no way she could deny anything. He told me that she would have to accept the terms of the settlement or she would risk losing everything. He told me that I was a good man and that I deserved to be happy. His words were a balm to my soul, a validation that I was doing the right thing. I came home that afternoon and found her in the kitchen, cooking dinner for the kids. She was humming to herself again. The normalcy of it all was so jarring. It was like we were on two different planets. I sat down at the kitchen table and I just watched her. She didn't notice me at first, and then she did. The smile on her face faded. "What's wrong, Mark?" she asked. I took a deep breath. "Nothing," I said. "I just want to talk." She looked at me for a long moment, and I could see the fear in her eyes. She knew. She had to. She had been living with this lie for so long. She had to know that the truth was going to come out eventually. We sat down at the kitchen table, two strangers, with the ghost of our life together sitting between us. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just talked. I told her that I knew. I told her that I had been watching her, that I had been collecting evidence, that I had been talking to a lawyer. I told her about the parking ticket in her purse. I told her about the credit card receipts. I told her about the plane tickets to another city. And then I told her about Kevin. That was the one that hit her. The other things she could have denied, she could have blamed on me, she could have lied about. But the name of the man she had been having an affair with, the man I had considered a friend, that was the one that made her flinch. She didn't deny it. She just sat there, looking at me, her face pale. She didn't apologize. She didn't try to explain herself. She just sat there, in a moment of pure, raw silence. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Since the beginning." I just didn't want to believe it. The truth was, I hadn't known. I had suspected, but I hadn't known. But I wanted her to believe that I had known all along, that I had been playing a long game, a chess match that she had just lost. I wanted her to feel the weight of her lies, the weight of my silence. I wanted her to understand that I was not a victim, but a strategist. And then, I handed her the folder. She opened it, and I could see her hands shaking. The folder was filled with documents, with bank statements, with receipts, with everything I had been collecting for the past few weeks. I had a copy of the divorce settlement and a letter from David. I want a divorce, Sarah. I want to be done with this. I want to be done with the lies, with the deceit, with the betrayal. I want my life back. She looked at me, and her eyes were filled with tears. "You're not going to get it," she said. "You're going to have to fight for it. I'm going to make you miserable." I just shook my head. "I don't want to fight, Sarah. I'm not asking you for anything. I'm telling you what's going to happen. This is the last conversation we're going to have about this. The next one will be with our lawyers." I stood up and left the room. I didn't look back. I didn't want to. I went into the living room and sat down on the sofa. I had my hands on my knees, and I just sat there. I felt a sense of relief, a sense of freedom. The burden of the lie was gone. I had said the words I had been too afraid to say. I'd done the thing I had been too afraid to do. I had faced the truth, and I had come out the other side. The phone started to ring, and I knew it was her. I let it go to voicemail. I didn't want to talk to her. I didn't want to hear her lies. I didn't want to hear her excuses. I just wanted to be alone. I just wanted to feel the silence. Later that evening, the kids came home. They were full of life, full of energy. They were laughing and talking and playing. They were so happy, so oblivious. And I looked at them, and I knew that I was doing the right thing. I was not a man who was going to be defined by a betrayal. I was a man who was going to be defined by his strength, his dignity, and his love for his kids. I was going to be a man who was going to teach them what it means to be a man who is not afraid to walk away from a lie, a man who is not afraid to start over. And I knew that in the end, that was the most important lesson of all. The final confrontation wasn't about me winning, it was about me taking back my life. And I knew that in that moment, I had won.
The divorce wasn't easy, but it wasn't the war she promised. In the end, it was a quiet surrender. She tried to fight me at first, to deny everything. She tried to make it about me, about my work, about my unemotional nature. She tried to make me out to be the bad guy, the cold and heartless man who was leaving his family. But David, my lawyer, was a master. He was prepared. He had all the documentation, all the evidence. He had a roadmap of her lies, and he was ready to expose them all. And in the end, she couldn't face it. She couldn't face the truth. So she accepted the terms of the settlement. She took the money, and she left. It was over. The day she left, it was a Saturday. The kids were at their friends' houses, and she was alone. She came to me, and she said, "I'm sorry, Mark. I'm so sorry." And I just looked at her. I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pain. I didn't feel love. I just felt nothing. It was like looking at a stranger. She packed her bags and left. The house was quiet. The silence wasn't a third person anymore. It was just the silence of a house. I sat down on the sofa, and I just sat there. I felt a sense of peace, a sense of relief. The weight was gone, the burden was lifted. I was free, but I was also alone. The first few months were the hardest. The house felt too big, too empty. I didn't know how to cook for one person. I didn't know how to go to bed alone. I didn't know how to exist without her. But I also knew that I couldn't go back. I couldn't go back to the lies, to the deceit, to the betrayal. I had to go forward. I had to find a new way of living. I had to learn how to be a man, a single dad. I started small. I started with the kitchen. I learned how to cook for one person, and then I learned how to cook for 3. I started to take the kids to their sports games, to their practices, to their concerts. I started to have long, deep conversations with them. I talked to them about my day, and they talked to me about theirs. I was surprised by how much they knew, how much they had seen. They had known that something was wrong. They had known that their mom and I weren't happy. They had known that there was a distance between us. And they were relieved when we finally separated. They were relieved that the lies were gone, that the silence was gone, that the house was filled with peace. It was a new kind of family, a different kind of family, but it was a family nonetheless. And it was a family built on a foundation of truth. I didn't try to turn them against their mother. I didn't talk about the affair, about the betrayal, about the pain. I just told them that sometimes two people aren't meant to be together. And they understood. The real revenge, I realized, wasn't about making her suffer. It wasn't about winning in the courtroom. It wasn't about taking her for all she was worth. The real revenge was about living a better life. It was about being a better man. It was about finding a way to be happy, to be whole, to be at peace. It was about not letting her take away my happiness. It was about not letting her take away my dignity. It was about not letting her take away my identity. She had tried to define me by her lies, but I was going to define myself by my truth. I was going to be a man who is going to walk away from a broken marriage and build a new life for himself. I was going to be a man who was going to be a good father, a good friend, a good human being. One day, a few months after the divorce was finalized, I was sitting in my car waiting to pick up my son from his soccer practice. I saw Kevin, the man who had betrayed me, walking to his car. He saw me, and he looked away. He didn't say hello. He didn't nod. He just looked away, and he hurried into his car. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel any desire to confront him. I just felt pity. I felt pity for him and for my ex-wife. They were still living a lie. They were still hiding from the truth. They were still afraid to face what they had done. I was free. I was at peace. They were still in a prison of their own making. I realized that my revenge wasn't about them at all. It was about me. It was about my own freedom, my own happiness, my own peace. My life isn't perfect now, but it's mine. It's a life built on a foundation of truth and honesty and love. I found a new way to live, a new way to be a man, a new way to be a dad, and a new way to be me. The betrayal was a terrible thing. It was a wound that will never completely heal. But it was also a gift. It was a gift of clarity. It was a gift of strength. It was a gift of freedom. The most powerful revenge isn't about making someone else suffer. It's about finding the courage to walk away from the pain and build a life so beautiful that the past no longer has a hold on you. And that, my friends, is a victory that no one can ever take away from you.